actually think I heard two. I was like, Joel. Where is Joel? And then he said that he was dead.
We have these true crimes, these murder mysteries on every week. But you know what makes this one different? It was broken wide open by one of our viewers just watching 2020 at home.
Told me that Joel had been stabbed to death.
This would be Joel's room where he was sleeping. This would be Julie Ray's bedroom where she was sleeping. She encounters this dark figure. They begin fighting.
There wasn't any overturned furniture.
They decided that Julie had tried to stage the crime scene and just not done it very well.
What could be worse than being wrongfully convicted? Well, being wrongfully convicted of the murder of your only child.
I didn't commit this crime. I did not.
But if Julie didn't do it, who did?
I'm at the home of Alan Berkshire. Alan, do I have your permission to videotape your statement today?
Yes, you most certainly do.
I had encountered a person in the Lawrenceville drive-in on Friday night, just a couple of days before Joel Kirkpatrick was murdered. And he come in and he looked around and he kind of almost seemed disoriented. He sat down and started talking, is this your son? I said, yes, this is my youngest son. And he tapped him on the shoulder one time. He said, I'll bet you're a pretty good boy or something. He made a very unusual comment that really upset me. He said, I'll bet you're afraid of me, aren't you? And the guy did a funny, I guess maybe everybody ought to be afraid of me.
That's about the happiest face you've ever seen. His plan was to be a programmer and video game tester, but the intentions of a 10-year-old boy. Joel was brilliant, beyond my wildest imagination. I'm not saying that just because he's my kid. Everybody loves a kid, but every teacher told me that he was the smartest student they ever had.
What's your Sunday school teacher's name?
Carla.
Carla? Is she nice?
Can you describe him to me? What kind of kid was he? What was he like?
The namest kid in the world, and I'm not just saying that because I'm his mother. Joel was sensitive and kind and caring and perceptive, but he was also a little boy. He didn't like to have to take a bath, and everybody kind of wanted to be around Joel. He was just really fun.
I do remember Joel. He was just a very nice kid. He didn't have anything malicious about him. He's just a very happy and smiley person.
I can remember that last time I saw Joel, it was his weekend to be with his mother.
Julie and Len were married for 8 years, but divorced when Joel was 7.
But the one thing that they both were totally consistent on was this was an exceptional boy, a beautiful boy, and that they both loved him more than anything else.
It was a long weekend, Columbus Day, I think. Since he was going to be out of school on Monday, Julie asked her if she could have an extra day. I said yes, and I go in to say goodbye to Joel. He gave me that bear hug that he liked to do. I kissed him goodbye.
Joel said he wanted to be with me that day, and we had a blast. We went to a park with a blanket. Look at the clouds and see that? That's a this or that's a that. Do you see this? Do you see that?
They were very affectionate. Lots of hugs and just good communication. He loved being with her and doing things with her.
We had gotten a milkshake and went home.
Julie had a house in Lawrenceville. It was a tidy little ranch-style home and kind of a subdivision there in town, and this is where she would be when Joel would come for his visits.
I remember being at their house that evening, actually.
Touch nothing but the land.
I remember watching Aladdin while the moms were talking, doing their thing over at the dinner table.
Julie was always a wonderful hostess and, made you feel really comfortable at her house. We sat down at the table and worked on our scrapbooks and, talked about hopes and dreams and life and just things that we normally talked about.
After a while, Joel said that he wanted to go to bed. He didn't feel good. I went and tucked him in and prayed with him and told him I loved him, and we said goodnight like always.
She made sure she locked the front door. She has never been able to say for sure whether she locked the door from the garage into the kitchen.
Around midnight, I crashed. I was exhausted.
She was asleep, and at some point, she was awakened.
I heard a scream.
The scream didn't really sound like Joel because it sounded so horrible.
I was really groggy, and I really don't want to talk about this.
But it's kind of important for us to have it in your own words.
I know, it's just really hard. I didn't say I went, and I'm just having a hard time. I just remember thinking, oh my God, what if it's Joel?
He was not in his bed.
I know I screamed his name. I was like, Joel.
And the next thing she knows, a man jumps across the bed toward her.
The person had on a ski mask.
They scuffle. She's trying to stop him from getting away.
He was obviously trying to get out of there. He broke out the door.
She's hanging onto his leg.
The person was hitting my face into the ground.
She said that he removed his mask and then just sauntered off into the night.
I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I thought, oh my God, they've kidnapped Joel because the person was walking away. It's like, where is Joel? I ran to the closest house and started pounding on the door and screaming to get let in, to call the police.
She was in shock. Her eyes were big. She had a big knot over her eye.
Julie said, somebody has taken Joel. And then she said, will you please go find him?
About 4:30 in the morning, a call went in from a neighbor's home, and the Lawrenceville police arrived.
2 officers that came to the scene. One stayed with Julie, and then the deputy went into the house.
When he did so, he made his way to the back bedroom and found Joel lying in a pool of blood next to his bed.
Between the bed and the wall.
He had a t-shirt on, and it was covered with blood. That's when I saw a big hole in his chest. He was already gone. It was just a real bad scene.
And then he said that he was dead. And I said, no, he was wasn't in the house, he would have heard me. I screamed for him, he would have come. I thought maybe they were wrong, maybe he was still alive.
When 10-year-old Joel Kirkpatrick was found stabbed to death, his mother told police both she and her son were attacked by a knife-wielding intruder, but a search for this suspect turned up no leads.
One of the things that made police begin to focus on Julie Ray was a series of odd observations made the night of the crime.
Then I looked at her knees, and she pulled her knees up like a little child and said, "I have a boo-boo on my knees."
Lawrenceville is, I would say, a quintessential Midwestern town. It's a rural community, it's a farming community.
Miles and miles of cornfields, less than 5,000 people. I think at that time we probably had 3 stoplights.
It has a small town square, it's coffee shops and the occasional bar and a grocery store, and it's a friendly little quiet place.
10-year-old Joel Kirkpatrick was found murdered here in his Lawrenceville, Illinois home early the morning of October 13th.
I can see them drive up, plain as day. You can tell by the look on their face that they didn't come here with good news. They sat down with me and told me that Joel had been stabbed to death.
Julie and Len married very young. They were both children of missionaries.
We met when we were 16 years old. We got married when I was 1 month after my 18th birthday. She was 17, her parents signed for her.
Joel came along very quickly after they got married, less than a year. Julie was pursuing a PhD in educational psychology, and Lynn was pursuing law enforcement. But they divorced by the time he was 7 or 8.
It was a pretty bitter divorce, and they had joint custody of Joel, but Len had just won physical custody.
There was a long battle for custody of Joel, and the final decision was that August, 2 months before his death.
The difference came down to the fact that Julie was single, while Lynn Kirkpatrick had remarried, and so his home would be a 2-parent home.
Julie was not happy about that, to say the least.
I'm John Miller, Deputy Commissioner of the New York City Police Department for Intelligence and Counterterrorism. And at the time this happened, I was with 2020. I was the co-anchor with Barbara Walters, and this was the story that I was assigned to. Investigators are looking at the crime scene, and they're looking for the story that the crime scene will tell.
The police didn't have a lot of experience investigating cases of this magnitude. So pretty quickly, they called in the Illinois State Police.
What the officers found in her house did not fit their mental image of what they would find had there been an intruder.
Julie had claimed that there had been this terrible struggle with an intruder, and yet the house was not in the kind of condition where you would expect a house to be after that.
This is a scale model representing the house where Julie Ray and Joel were the night of the crime. This would be Joel's room where he was sleeping. This would be Julie Ray's bedroom where she was sleeping. In this vestibule in between the two, she encounters this dark figure. They begin fighting. That fight, according to her, comes out of the vestibule through the dining area towards, there's a door that leads to the garage. It goes through the garage to another door, and that is where the struggle in the rear yard starts.
The house itself was very neat inside. There wasn't any overturned furniture. There wasn't any pictures on the wall that had been knocked askew. There wasn't any broken chairs.
There were no signs of anything stolen, and no apparent forced entry.
She became a suspect the very morning of October 13th, 1997, because the crime scene technicians that arrived saw that the scene did not fit her story.
I went up to the funeral home. I wanted to be alone and see him for myself. I went to the table, pulled back his cover, and it just suddenly hit me. He was killed with a knife that came from the last gift I ever gave her as husband and wife at Christmas.
They would discover that the murder weapon was a steak knife that was in the butcher block in the kitchen. So, in other words, the story becomes he came into the house without even a weapon.
The murder weapon was found on the floor in the hallway between the two bedrooms.
The knife is found on the carpet. The evidence seemed to suggest that it had been placed there as opposed to thrown down. You don't see any blood spatter around the knife.
When she ran next door and barefooted and in her underwear and t-shirt, even to the neighbors, he made strange comments.
Here was this lady who's just been distraught, and I'm looking at her arm and she says, "You don't have to worry about me, I don't have AIDS." Almost a total change of personality there for that brief moment. Then I looked at her knees, and she pulled her knees up like a little child and said, "I have a boo-boo on my knees."
These were just comments made within minutes of this woman supposedly discovering that her child had been abducted from her home.
Julie's shirt had traces of blood on it.
On the back of her shirt that appeared to have been a spatter.
DNA testing would later reveal that it was Joel's blood on the shoulder and back of Julie's shirt.
Her account doesn't have her in contact with Joel at any time during that crime. She thinks he's been kidnapped, so how would blood from him have transferred onto her when she didn't have that contact?
The more investigators looked into it, the more they became convinced that Julie was the suspect and nobody else.
The question that the police officers immediately had was, who does this? Who breaks into a home for no reason, kills a kid for no reason, and then leaves an adult essentially unharmed? Doesn't make any sense to them.
They told me to meet him at the police station. I thought they were trying to do their job. They said they thought I did it. They said that they were sure I did it. And I said, "You're wrong. I didn't commit this crime."
Ten-year-old Joel Kirkpatrick was found murdered. His mother told police she was awakened by hearing her son screaming.
People woke up and were just stunned. The shock of an ugly murder like this in a small town.
You think everybody's safe, then something like that happens. It's frightening.
Just because it's a small town, that's no sign it's not going to happen here.
She says she was then attacked by an intruder. A Lawrence County Sheriff's deputy found 10-year-old Joel dead a short time later.
Julie had seen the intruder's face without a mask. She sees him for just a few seconds, and then he takes off after that.
I looked over my right shoulder and saw the person walking away, and they had the mask off at that time.
Julie worked with a sketch artist and then came up with a sketch.
She described the assailant as thin, about 5'9" to 5'11", wearing camouflage pants.
And this was circulated in the hopes of finding who she was talking about.
As for the people of Lawrenceville, it's the community rumor mill that's fueling their own stories as to just what may have happened to Joel Kirkpatrick.
There was a woman who sold a Greyhound bus ticket to somebody who she felt matched the description based on this sketch.
The woman called the police and said that man was at the bus station.
Someone else said that they saw a man over by the railroad track wearing camo fatigues.
There were a group of kids at a party who said that some kids had shown up at the party saying, "We just killed somebody." And some of them said that those kids had blood on their clothes.
Must have been 3 teenagers, I guess, broke in there.
Was it a kid that we went to school with killed Joel?
To a group of boys tripping on methamphetamine.
None of this checked out.
There were other leads coming in and other leads being looked at. But in the end, they kept coming back to her.
Julie cooperated with the investigation. She was interviewed by the state police 3 times.
Conducting this test, there are a couple of issues I have to explore. One is that everything happened exactly the way you said it happened. Another is that you harmed Joel.
I remember Julie took a polygraph test to prove she had nothing to do with it.
What I'd like to do is to get you attached to the instrument. So I have to put this around behind you. During the early morning hours of 13 October 1997, were you assaulted by a masked intruder you did not know?
Julie took 2 polygraph tests not from the state police, but from independent polygraph examiners.
Did you deliberately cause any of Joel's injuries?
Julie passed both of them.
After really a small number of leads, the police ran out of other suspects. The case went cold. Julie was still suspect number 1.
I said, well, do you still think I'm a suspect? You know, are you wasting your time on that? And he said, well, yeah, you're a suspect. You were there. And I said, okay, and so who else are you looking at? And he said, you're our main suspect.
They didn't have enough evidence to indict her, and so the case kind of just languished for a few years.
No one has been identified as the suspect, and there is not enough evidence that we've evaluated for us to make that decision at this time.
The case just went nowhere almost immediately. I pity the investigators just because this would happen every time I called them. And they had to have got sick of it for years. Nothing happened.
How do you keep your head above the water when you never love?
Julie tried to move on with her life. She remarried to a man named Mark Harper. She moved to Bloomington, Indiana.
Julie's family put up a reward on the 1-year anniversary of Joel's death for any information leading to the killer, and the reward was never paid out.
She continues working on her PhD, but all the time she kind of knows that this could crop up again.
It's now 2000. An appellate prosecutor gets the case. He is convinced that Julie Ray is guilty. So he takes the case to the grand jury, and he gets an indictment.
Ed Parkinson is appointed to prosecute this case.
The fact that this is a circumstantial case for the most part doesn't make it any less the case. Very few murders are witnessed. This was a strong circumstantial case.
This is not the first time Julie Kirkpatrick has been rumored to be involved in her son's murder, but it is the first time she has been officially labeled as a suspect.
I was shocked going to appoint a grand jury for her. I can't imagine a mother doing something like that to a child.
To believe her, you would have to believe that this assailant came into her home in the middle of the night, forgot to bring a murder weapon along, and after he accomplished his result, he then pulled off the mask to reveal his identity to her. Total nonsense.
She had invited me to spend the night there. And why would she invite me to be there? She planned on killing Joel. Didn't make any sense at all.
grand jury handed down 2 counts of first-degree murder against Julie. There hadn't been any movement on the case in 3 years, so it was, wow, we couldn't believe this was happening.
It just feels so surreal, like, how in the world did this even happen? She surrendered, she hugged each one of us, and then was taken away into the jail.
When she was arrested, she still had a belief that the truth would come out, that the legal system would prove her to be innocent.
I didn't commit this crime. I said I could not. I'm not capable. I would not. I have no reason to. And I did not.
Attorneys tell News 25 she is anxious to now have her case go to trial so a jury can hear the truth.
Julie's trial took place in Wayne County, Illinois. The judge granted a change of venue case because of all the pretrial publicity.
The courtroom was small. It had benches in it that looked like pews. Julie had a public defender because she couldn't afford anything else, and you had the whole entire resources of the state against her.
And so it's a total mismatch in the courtroom.
The prosecution's case is there was no other explanation. They reject her explanation that there was a masked intruder who entered her house and killed her son with a knife that he found in the butcher block. It sounds too preposterous.
To believe her, you would have to believe that this assailant came into her home in the middle of the night in dark clothes, hiding his identity by the use of a mask for the sole purpose of killing a 10-year-old boy. And yet he took such care to hide his identity by wearing the mask. He also forgot to bring a murder weapon along and used her kitchen knife to do it with. And after he accomplished his result, according to her, he then pulled off the mask to reveal his identity to her. Total nonsense.
The best evidence against Julie was that she survived.
During the trial, prosecutors presented to the jury that Julie had essentially staged the whole scene.
They look at the 2 doors where there were breaks, and there's glass broken, but it's fallen on the outside. So the prosecution made an issue of this, which is if the person broke the glass to break into the house, the glass would be on the inside.
They decided that Julie had tried to stage the crime scene and just not done it very well.
The house was in complete neatness. And if there was a struggle throughout a long hallway, out through the kitchen, past furniture, past plaques on the wall, as she described, fighting and wrestling with this intruder, there would have been some disturbance, some blood trail, something knocked ajar. There was none.
They want a jury to believe that because the furniture wasn't torn up, there must not have been a struggle. I keep coming back to, where's the blood? Where's the bloody clothing? Where's the blood on her? They want to say that she had blood on her and she got rid of it. Where is it? They dug up the septic tank. The drains are dry. The traps have no blood in them.
She stabbed him through a quilt, through a blanket, through a sheet, down into his shirt and into his chest. So each time the knife was brought back, it was being wiped by the cover.
The case against Julie Ray was entirely circumstantial, and a big part of it was based on expert testimony about blood spatter.
I'm Matt Steiner. I'm a certified senior crime scene analyst. We're going to cover the container of animal blood, and now we're going to take the knife and we're going to put it through the sheet and comfort her to see what happens. So it did wipe it off somewhat, but there's still visible blood on that blade. As we see from photographs at the crime scene, we have bloodstain patterns on the headboard, the wall, and the carpeting. So I think the whole theory of not getting blood on Julie because of this wiping action here is false. If she had killed Joel, we'd expect to see a lot more blood on the shirt, and there's not.
Julie's shirt had traces of blood on it, Joel's blood. The prosecution claimed that the blood traces on her shirt spattered there directly while she was killing her son.
How did the little boy's blood get on her shirt?
Well, if Julie did scuffle with this intruder, who would have had blood on him from stabbing this child, it's entirely plausible that she would have a little transfer stain on her.
Also, there was the question of the knife.
The knife was found on the floor between the two bedrooms, and the investigators said there were no signs that the knife had been dropped or the knife had been tossed.
We say it was placed because there was no evidence that there was blood spatters immediately around the blade of the knife.
But what they didn't realize is that often in crime scenes, killers that use a knife will wipe the knife off on their clothing. And then if I take that knife and I just drop it at our scene, we're not going to see spatter from that knife.
Even in the backyard, investigators said there didn't seem to be any indication of a struggle.
They had an officer testify that there were no footprints in the grass because they would have been seen in the dew of the grass.
To this day, one of the things I can remember most clearly about the trial are some of the autopsy pictures they showed of Joel. He was just a kid, and it was just awful.
One of them was Joel's body lying between the bed and the wall. I've been a reporter for decades, and that was the only picture that stuck with me in a really bad way.
The prosecution made Julie's character the central argument in their case. Julie herself never testified. Her lawyer did not want her to testify.
Brad told me absolutely not to. I argued with him about it, and I said, Brad, I want to. This jury has not had a chance to hear me talk. And he's like, no, our experts have said that Parkinson will use anything you say and try to twist it around. And I'm thinking, well, that's different than what he's done so far. How? Because he's done that with everything.
I did not think that she would bear up well under cross-examination, not because she wouldn't be telling the truth, but because her demeanor, the way she answers questions, she doesn't answer them directly.
I was asked to testify in Julie's trial that she had invited me to spend the night there. And why would she invite me to be there? She planned on killing Joel. Didn't make any sense at all.
Why would a mother kill her child? We don't know. We do know, though, that there was a long battle for custody of Joel. And she disliked her ex-husband so much that whether this was to punish him or whether in her own twisted way, she thought Joel would be better off than growing up with her ex-husband.
I know it's an oversimplification, but I believe it's as simple as, if I can't have him, you can't either.
When they announced the verdict, it was just so unbelievable.
I don't think Mr. Parkinson or I, either one, knew what the result would be.
I literally cried in my chair.
The jury didn't seem to deliberate that long. I think they were only out 5 hours, maybe a little more, and they came back with a verdict that same day.
The verdict? Julie Ray was guilty of first-degree murder of her son Joel.
Julie turned around, started crying, and was looking at all of us. It was just so unbelievable.
I don't know how they came back with a guilty verdict. I really have no clue.
There was really an overwhelming sense of anger, shock, disbelief.
She was found guilty of murder and was sentenced to 65 years in prison.
This is Julie Ray moments after a jury found her guilty of stabbing her son Joel to death in his bed.
I can't tell you there's any science as to how juries come to the decisions they come to. Stronger people win out, and people who aren't so strong in their convictions or in their persistence will give in.
The more I talked, I really felt like she was guilty. There was no logical explanation on how she couldn't have done it. She said he just stopped beating her head on the ground. He walked off and pulled his mask off.
Under a security light.
Calmly, too.
Yeah.
And it just didn't have the ring of truth?
No. And my thought was, why didn't he kill her?
To me, it was the fact that in her statement, she says that she wrestled in the backyard with this man, and he beat her head violently on the ground. Deputy York testified that there was no dew disturbed in the backyard.
Well, the fact that they said that there was no sign of forced entry, no blood trail, all of it added together.
And the prosecution said the murderer came in the house and he throwed up his hands and say, "Oh, I forgot a murder weapon." If he had intentions to kill somebody, you would think he would have brought his own weapon.
Julie had this story that, I mean, it honestly, it doesn't make sense. And Parkinson said that she was convicted by her own ridiculous story.
In talking to those jurors, the key difference, according to the people who were on the fence, was she didn't get up on the stand.
I looked at her for 2 weeks, stared her in her eyes for 2 weeks. I wanted her to tell me that story. What happened? See how upset she was, how she felt.
The prosecution didn't have to prove any motive, but the jurors were convinced that Julie wanted to do anything to keep her son Joel away from her ex-husband Lynn.
I feel it was hatred toward her husband. If I can't have him, no one will. I just felt she snapped. I truly do.
I'm very satisfied that this jury spent 2 weeks listening to the evidence, and they didn't take very long to find her guilty unanimously.
Not for 1 second do I believe that she could have ever even thought about murdering her son. She loved that child so much.
Not long after she's convicted, we get to the town in Illinois, and, we arranged the interview.
Julie was allowed out briefly. She had a very moving reunion with her new husband and with her parents. It is genuine love. It is relief, if only for a short period. They hug. She's in tears. It's quite a moment.
The kind of reunion she was having with her loved ones really got her, over the top emotionally. And you kind of can almost see her recovery, occur on the video before the interview starts. The woman who had not testified at trial was about to testify to the whole world through 2020 for the first time.
Tonight on 2020, John Miller, with a murder that turned up lots of leads.
Did you kill your son, Joel?
No. Why would I? I wouldn't hurt anyone. This person in the world I would hurt is my son.
I have interviewed every kind and form of criminal. You can't tell who's telling the truth and who's a very good liar. There's no human lie detector. But she gave every sign of someone who was willing to answer every question and didn't seem to have trouble coming up or constructing those answers. Are you hoping people will hear this, that something will change?
Yes, I do hope that. At a very survival-oriented level, I am praying to God. My son knows I didn't hurt him. My son knows I would have never hurt him.
It was a desperate call, one that was just made of hope. Can someone hear this? And what happens next is truly remarkable.
She was interested in getting this story out there and hoping that someone might be able to corroborate it. And as it turns out, someone could.
The 2020 show becomes a pivotal turning point.
I sat down to watch 2020. I didn't expect that I would blow a case apart.
A serial murderer sitting on death row says, "I did it."
It was a horrifying story that rocked this tiny town in southern Illinois. The intruder breaking in without any apparent motive, killing her son, and then running away, which sounded unlikely enough that she was convicted.
But whoever could have imagined that a 2020 viewer, a true crime writer watching one night, would cause a complete U-turn?
I had justice in my hands and I had to do something.
Did you commit the murder of the boy in Lawrenceville?
Yes. This is another one of my murders.
That guy would confess to anything.
The prosecutor completely dismisses the Tommy Lindsell's confession. He calls it fiction. They have a serial murderer sitting on death row who says, I did it.
You'd think that would get Julie Ray out of prison, but not so fast.
How do you keep your head above the water?
Tonight on 2020 with Barbara Walters and John Miller.
ABC 2020 does the story of Julie's case within a few months after she's convicted. And for the first time, Julie tells what happened in her own words.
Somebody jumped on me or at me, and I didn't know what was going on.
One of the people watching that night was Diane Fanning, who's a crime writer.
Did you kill your son, Joel?
No.
I think Julie agreed to talk to us because she was out of options.
At the time, Diane Fanning is working on her first book, which is about a serial killer named Tommy Lynn Sells.
Tommy Lynn Sells is on death row for attempting to murder 2 small girls. I mean, these girls are not much older than Joel.
Tommy Lynn Sells is on death row for the slashing murder of 13-year-old Kayleen Harris. Also attacked with a knife, a 10-year-old girl sleeping in the same room.
I woke this girl up. She tried to come over here, and I stabbed her. And this little girl up here, I walked over here, and I went like this.
After he slit my throat, I just laid there, and then he left.
I decided to write about Tommy Lynn Sells because of the last little girl he tried to murder. She survived, and she became my hero.
I got up and went down to the neighbors. I just went as fast as I could.
Diane Fanning was sort of pen pals. She had gone and interviewed Tommy Lynn Sells many times, but in between wrote letters with him.
I was almost finished writing my book when I sat down to watch 2020. So I'm listening to Julie Ray herself talking about how she did not kill her 10-year-old boy. And then the prosecutor came on.
To believe her, you would have to believe that this assailant came into her home for the sole purpose of killing a 10-year-old boy. And yet he also forgot to bring a murder weapon along and used her kitchen knife to do it with. Total nonsense.
Sells had done that on more than one occasion. He often didn't bring weapons with him.
So after watching 2020, Diane sits down and writes Sells a letter.
The other night, I was watching a story on TV about a woman who claimed someone broke into her house and listened to the prosecuting attorney. A person does not come into someone else's home without a weapon and then pull a knife out of the kitchen drawer in the house and use it. I thought that the crime could have been committed by somebody who was very much like Tommy Lynn Sells. And I did not tell him the name of the prosecutor, the name of the case, the town where it occurred, the time when it occurred. Nothing like that.
Tommy Lynn Sells writes back, and Diane Fanning is just absolutely blown away.
Tommy responded by writing, about that woman claims someone broke into her house. Was that like maybe 2 days before my Springfield, Missouri murder? Maybe on a 13th? I was shocked. Joel was murdered on the 13th. And Stephanie Mahaney in Springfield, Missouri on the 15th of that month.
This serial killer on death row nails the exact date of Joel's murder, October the 13th. That's 2 days before he's believed to have kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and killed Stephanie Mahaney.
He described Stephanie Mahaney in a Bugs Bunny nightshirt. The Texas Rangers considered that a corroborated confession because he had given details that only the killer would know.
When I read that letter, my hands started shaking. I felt I had justice in my hands and I had to do something. The first thing I did was call Texas Ranger Johnny Allen. He knew Sells well. And he said that what I was telling him made it sound like it was very possible that Sells killed Joel. I thought maybe someone who had more ability to get information than I did would be able to track this down.
So she just kind of alludes to it in her book.
Anger drove him. He picked up a knife and headed straight for the first bedroom door. There, 10-year-old Joel Kirkpatrick dreamed his last dream.
Diane Fanning publishes her book, and clearly 2020 had to go back and look into the story again. Clearly, I was going to interview Tommy Lynn Sells.
Did you commit the murder of the boy in Lawrenceville?
It's never pleasant to interview someone in jail. People who are incarcerated are difficult sometimes. It's not the kind of assignment I've ever looked forward to. I'm Lynn Scher, and I was a 2020 correspondent, and I covered Julie Ray's story. The idea of a mother and a father losing his child is as sad as it gets. I walked into this interview at maximum security prison in Texas.
Show me where you want me.
And there I was facing serial murderer Tommy Lynn Sells.
An ex-con and a known drifter, Sells is linked to murders in at least 11 states.
His victims died from gunshots, blunt trauma, throats being cut, strangulation.
He preferred, he's told me, strangulation because then he could watch the light leave their eyes.
I was very grateful for that barrier between us. This is a man who was pure evil.
Tommy, you know why we're here, so let's get right to it.
He seemed mild-mannered. He seemed a little coy. He was playing with me.
What were you wearing on your feet, do you remember?
What was you wearing 3 years ago? 4 years ago?
But he essentially confessed.
Did you murder?
Yes.
A child in Lawrenceville, Illinois?
Yes. This is another one of my murders.
So much of what Tommy Lynn Sells told me that day sounded exactly like what Julie Ray had described.
It was around midnight. I checked on him. He was sleeping. He was fine.
I know it was late, and that's the time I mostly strike. It's late.
Why would you go to a house intent on killing someone and not bring your own weapon?
I guess you ain't never seen me kill you with my bare hands.
Do you remember the actual moment that you killed this other person? And how you did it?
With a knife.
I heard a scream.
And I hear someone in the house.
And I jumped up and ran in there.
And I get up, and that's when I noticed it was a woman.
Somebody jumped on me or at me.
I went to cut her, but I didn't have the knife no more. I'm not sure what the hell happened did.
He broke out the door.
She tried to follow me.
The person seemed really angry with me at this point.
I finally just hit her.
Hitting my face into the ground.
And that's when it stopped, and I went ahead and disappeared.
I've met awful people. I've met awful people who don't necessarily murder children.
Do you, in fact, recall that it was a young child?
Maybe I just don't like to say that.
Why not?
Living with what I done is a hell of a lot harder than doing it.
He just had a calmness about his body and a look in his eyes that I found terrifying. Sells' confession sparked new interest in Julie's story.
All of this publicity caught the attention of the Illinois Innocence Project, and they took up Julie Ray's case
to find what other evidence there may be to connect Tommy Lynn Sells to this case. Turns out there's a lot.
Sells described that the house, it was brick, and so that was one of the details he knew and was accurate about. My name is Bill Clutter. I'm a private investigator that investigates wrongful conviction cases.
I'm in Lawrenceville looking north on Highway 1.
When Bill Clutter goes down to Lawrenceville and starts asking around, little pieces were starting to add up to corroboration with Julie's story.
One of the key pieces of investigation was the sighting of Tommy Lynn Sells both in Lawrenceville and then across the border in Indiana.
Jane Ray, Julie's mother, told me that I should pay particular attention to the Greyhound bus ticket agent.
Sandra, would you please state your full name?
My name is Sandra June Worth.
Sandra Worth was a Greyhound ticket agent in Princeton, Indiana, who sold the ticket to the person she felt matched the description of the assailant. After seeing that, she contacted the Illinois State Police.
It was just odd, someone coming in like that and being nervous and needing a ticket right away. And
he wanted to buy a bus ticket to Winnemucca, Nevada.
The only reason it stood out to me is we don't sell very many tickets to Winnemucca, Nevada.
Had you ever heard of Winnemucca, Nevada before that?
I got thinking about that. Where have I seen Winnemucca, Nevada? I went to Diane Fanning's book. I read it once, and I reread it. And there it was. On December 13, 1997, the Texas Rangers put Tommy Lynn Sells in Winnemucca. And of course, the bus transfers at St. Louis.
Where do you think of when you think of home?
St. Louis.
St. Louis.
We know that Sells lived in St. Louis. That's where his mother lived.
What do you remember him saying about his mother?
He said his mother was sick and he had to get to her.
The state police had detectives board the bus, but the person that bought the ticket wasn't on the bus. Sells probably got off at St. Louis, traveled on to Springfield, Missouri, where he killed Stephanie Mahaney 2 days after Joel Kirkpatrick was killed.
And it turns out there was something in Sells' criminal history that shed some light on part of Julie's story that baffled police. Why would someone break into a house and target a kid instead of an adult?
My name is Fabian Witherspoon, and I'm a survivor of Tommy Lynn Sells.
I had encountered a person in the Lawrenceville drive-in on Friday night, just a couple of days before Joel Kirkpatrick was murdered.
I followed up on this tip that came in from Alan Berkshire, and I conducted the video interview in his home. So he has about a 45-minute opportunity to lay eyes on this guy. He matched the description of the assailant that Julie gave.
He was 145 pounds, maybe 155 pounds, about my height, about 5'9", 5'10". There was something definitely wrong with him. He was either drunk or high. He was telling me that he wasn't from around here and that he'd been living in St. Louis.
And he says that this drifter seems to be preoccupied with his son and
tapped him on the shoulder one time. You know, he said, "I'll bet you're afraid of me, aren't you?" And the guy did a funny, I guess maybe everybody ought to be afraid of me.
Alan Brookshire sees this drifter walking south toward the railroad tracks. If you keep walking, it would be in the direction of the neighborhood where Julie Ray was living at the time.
10-year-old Joel Kirkpatrick was found murdered here in his Lawrenceville, Illinois home. The boy had been stabbed multiple times.
On the morning that I heard there has been a little boy brutally murdered, I kept thinking, wow, maybe it was him.
The remarkable thing about this is that Alan Berkshire went to the sheriff to report encountering this drifter at the Lawrenceville diner.
I said, I have a possible suspect that I think you should try to find out. He said, okay, I'll have deputies and stuff check into this.
He takes Alan Berkshire's statement, but never documents it.
He never took any written information. Did any deputy contact you? Nothing.
Bill Clutter begins to compare Julie's statements with the interview Tommy Lynn Sells gave to the state police.
And many of those details match up perfectly. Sells described getting the knife from a butcher block.
I remember the knife. I want to say butcher block, but a square thing.
Julie described that the assailant backhanded her. Tommy Lynn Sells was interviewed 6 years later.
There wasn't no punching. I backhanded her.
Julie describes following the intruder out into the backyard, where he turns and again knocks her to the ground.
I hit her at the back of the house.
Those are details that Sells couldn't fabricate.
And it turns out there was something in Sells' criminal history that shed some light on a part of Julie's story that baffled police and the prosecutor. Why would someone break into a house and target a kid instead of an adult?
Tommy Lynn Sells had sort of shifted away from attacking adults after he attacked a woman named Fabian Witherspoon.
I was 19 years old, walking back to the house over the bridge, and I saw a man holding a sign that said, "Hungry, will work for food." He showed me a picture of 3 small children, and he said, "We're very hungry." He didn't look scary. I felt more sorry for him than anything.
She brought him home. She filled up a bag of food and another of clothing.
I had him wait on the porch outside and asked him to stay there. While I was doing that, he had come in the house and gotten a knife from the kitchen. He took me to the bathroom. He closed the door. He held the knife and started telling me things to do. That was, I think, the point where I said, no, I'm not going to do anything anymore. I'm going to fight. I saw on the back of the toilet was a ceramic duck. I picked the duck up and
smashed it into his head.
I'm thinking in the movies, if you get hit over the head with something, they pass out. And he was still standing.
She managed to get control of the knife, and she stabbed him and stabbed him and stabbed him.
And then I felt something come crashing down over my head. And that's the last thing I remember until I came to. I remember the detective asking me, "Who did this to you?" And I said, he had told me his whole name. Tommy Lynn Sells.
They had tracked him down. He had a nicked kidney, nicked liver. His testicle was sliced. He was cut up and bleeding profusely internally.
So that attack didn't just injure him physically. He also ended up in prison for about 5 years.
He decided, never again will I attack a man or a woman who is my size.
When he's released in the spring of 1997, just a few months before Joe Kirkpatrick was killed, he starts targeting the most vulnerable of victims, children.
There had been corroborating evidence to place him in Lawrenceville.
These corroborations, these eyewitnesses, that description of Tommy Lynn Sales, to us, that's pretty strong evidence.
With mounting evidence of Tommy Linsell's connection to Joel's murder, Julie's supporters are hoping this might prove her innocence.
You really don't buy into any of the Tommy Lynn Sales argument at all.
No, I quit reading fairy tales when I was about 9.
But a surprise no one could have predicted might give Julie a second chance. And it has nothing to do with Tommy Linsell's. Julie Ray has been in prison for 2 years, when surprisingly, a technicality sets aside her conviction.
It was just too good to be true. Are you sure? Right, pinch. Yep, are you sure? Okay, this is real. But then it was like too good to be true.
Prosecutor Ed Parkinson refiles charges. Julie will have to face a second trial.
Her family thought this day may never come, but after receiving the bond last week, today they raised the necessary $75,000 to bail Julie Ray Harper out of jail.
She's let out on bail, and then she reacts pretty much the way you would expect anyone to react who's just gotten out.
I'm a little embarrassed. I guess I wanted to feel the grass on my feet. Oh, it felt so good. Yeah. Incredible. It felt like I was home.
She will still face charges on the murder of her 10-year-old son, Joel Kirkpatrick, a crime she contends she did not commit.
Her second trial was moved because of publicity surrounding her case.
This trial happened in Carlisle, Illinois, another very small town.
I spent 2 years eager for a new trial. Pent up, nervous, scared, just all these emotions all at the same time.
In this case, a literal dream team was formed, starting with the Innocence Project, leading to the Center for Wrongful Convictions.
And they put together, I called it the best defense team money could possibly buy.
She had a defense team that was really extraordinary. The lead person on that defense team, Ron Safer, had actually at one point been a federal prosecutor working with one of the most prestigious law firms in Chicago.
I had not been nervous leading up to the trial. I was not nervous at all. And then I heard Parkinson stand up in front of the jury, and he put up the crime scene photo of Joel, which is horrific. And I looked at the jury, and I saw these people are angry. And she's the only one in this courtroom to vent their anger.
The prosecutors in the case had not changed their minds at all. They still believed that they had the killer, that the killer was Julie Ray.
The evidence was virtually the same from the prosecution standpoint. We had a 10-year-old boy stabbed in his own bed with his mother's knife in the middle of the night with no forced entry and for no reason.
The defense in the second trial called attention to shoddy police work, that the police decided so quickly that they already had their killer that they didn't have to go to any lengths whatsoever to rule out the possibility that she was telling the truth.
There were lots of questions raised about the fingerprinting process and what was and was not fingerprinted.
This was a house that was, the suspect herself lived in. This was not a fingerprint case.
And then they said, well, there's no evidence of an intruder. Of course, you didn't investigate the evidence of the intruder.
The classic example of what we call tunnel vision in the innocence movement.
They dusted around the doorway and on fragments of glass, and I think they made efforts at that. I don't believe they had tunnel vision.
I remember pictures of the officers holding up the bed linens to display the rips that had been made by the stabbing. To a crime scene investigator, they were pictures of officers destroying evidence because any kind of hair or other fibers were just falling off.
Our police investigator said that the bottom part of that was, which isn't shown in the picture, was still folded, was still there, and after which they folded it up.
One of the things that comes out later is that one of the officers claims that there were no footprints in the dew on the grass. Therefore, Julie's story about the intruder walking off couldn't be true. Both our students and Julie's second husband, Mark Harper, did a very clear investigation and found out meteorologically there could not have been dew on the ground. So one has to ask themselves, how do you explain that?
The glass was broken from the kitchen outwards to the garage in a way that appeared to our expert that this appeared to be staged.
Other experts countered that by saying you can break the glass, but it's actually the door swinging open and hitting the apex that causes the glass to fall.
The blood spatter becomes very critical when we get to the second trial.
There is blood spatter on the walls, on posters, on pictures, on the floor, on shoes, all the way across the room. Julie, not one single bit of projected blood from Joel.
There was some of Joel's blood on her t-shirt, which could have included Joel fighting for his life, pushing back. And in fact, our expert says that's what it was. It was like a handprint.
I remember very vividly where he holds up this nightshirt to the jury and he points at it and he says, "See, can't you see the imprint of a hand on this nightshirt that was Joel's hand trying to keep his mother away from him as she was stabbing him?" And the fact of the matter is, you couldn't even begin to see that.
She has transfer stains of Joel's blood on her back. Transfer stains. How does that get on her back? A third person? Innocent beyond any doubt.
Both the sheriff's office and the Illinois State Police declined to comment on the case.
Of course, the biggest difference between this trial and the first trial is someone has confessed. They have a serial murderer sitting on death row who says, "I did it."
Tommy Lynn Sells recanted. I think it was a made-up distraction, fabrication, complete BS.
One of the huge differences between the first trial and the second trial is that Julie's story all of a sudden made sense.
Looking back on it, if somebody's going to invent a story of an intruder, you would think she would have also invented a burglary or something to make it more believable. Instead, she stuck with this unlikely story that just happened to be the exact MO of a serial killer.
They introduce a who, and that's Tommy Lynn Sells. So that, in the reasonable doubt world, is an alternative suspect.
The same prosecutor from the first time around, Ed Parkinson, isn't buying any of the new evidence from Tommy Lynn Sells. He still believes she did it, that she murdered her son.
The defense interjected the myth, in my opinion, of a Tommy Lynn Sells, a serial killer out of Texas, and they threw that in there to derail the jury's focus on Julie Ray.
She has rug burns on her knees. She has scrapes and cuts on the top of her feet where she was dragged through the grass. She has a big black eye when he slammed her head into the ground. These wounds perfectly matched what Sells says happened and what she says happened.
One of the key pieces of evidence introduced at the trial is part of the transcript of my interview with Tommy Lynn Sells, where Tommy Lynn Sells confesses to me, to our audience, is now heard by the jury. Did you murder a child in Lawrenceville, Illinois?
Yes. This is another one of my murders.
The defense team tried to convince the jury by playing his videoed interviews that he did it. And that's smoke and mirrors. It's a fairy tale.
The prosecution maintained repeatedly that Tommy Lynn Sells had nothing to do with this.
That guy would confess to anything just to get out of a cell on death row, in my opinion. And besides, he was 33 years old at the time, and Julie described the assailant as a young kid. Does it even match that?
The person's Julie described was thin-built, 14 to 17 years old. You look at the driver's license, although Sells is in his early 30s, his weight is 130 pounds. He could have easily been mistaken for a much younger person with that low weight.
A lot of the work that Bill Clotter did on Tommy Lynn Sells becomes the basis for the evidence that gets used in the second trial.
There was independent evidence that somebody like Tommy Lynn Sells was there in the town.
Tommy Lynn Sells did not have a pristine memory of this murder. There's plenty of reasons that he got some things wrong, but he got a lot of things right.
And when you kill that many people, it's hard to keep all the details straight. They kind of mingle together in your head, I would think.
Tommy Lynn Sells later recanted. I think it was a made-up distraction, fabrication, and complete BS.
He did recant certain parts of his story. He told different details at different times, but it would almost be more suspicious if he had every detail exact.
Tommy Lynn Sells confessed. He recanted. Tommy Lynn Sells is a psychopath. You do not have to reach Tommy Lynn Sells or his confession to know that Julie is innocent beyond any doubt. But Tommy Lynn Sells is the embodiment of reasonable doubt.
In the second trial, the lawyers going in know some things that the first jury said we needed to hear from her. And she does testify.
They got to hear her explanation of events, and they got to hear how much she loved Joel.
It seemed to go quick.
How do you think he did?
Told the truth.
Again and again, I remember she began sentences sort of calmly and then would gradually sort of break down into crying, then have to compose herself.
I don't know if it was an act, but it didn't appear, we didn't see tears like that in the first trial.
If I were that talented, surely I would have done that during the first trial.
Even though it was a circumstantial case, I was still confident because from my view, I thought that this Tommy Lynn Sells nonsense was so out there that I thought the jury wouldn't buy that.
I prayed that they would see the truth.
There was no worse moment in my life, professionally, than waiting for that verdict.
And I saw Julie just go down to the ground.
The jury took about 12 hours, twice as long as the first time to deliberate.
Ed Parkinson, he had been there the entire time, and then just moments before the verdict, he left.
The other prosecutor went in. I had a bad feeling about it.
The foreman handed the envelope over to someone who took it to the judge. And I heard his words.
Wipe your tears away.
Jury came back. They said not guilty. Julie collapsed.
It was over. Finally. Finally.
She cried out, literally fell to the ground. I've covered a lot of trials and I've never quite seen anything like that.
And I just felt like Joel was right there with me. And he was just so happy. It was incredible.
Tears fell from the eyes of Julie Ray Harper minutes after she heard the jury's not guilty verdict.
I almost wanted to cry with her. I mean, my heart was just beating a mile a minute. We freed this woman.
This has been a nightmare that nobody should have to live through.
Legally, she's not just acquitted. She's not just not guilty. The state of Illinois gave Julie Ray a certificate of innocence.
The special prosecutors, such as the one in my case, need to be held accountable.
If someone like Julie, who led an exemplary life, can be swept up and accused of a crime she did not commit, that means all of us are vulnerable.
When the wrong person is arrested, tried, and ultimately convicted, the real perpetrator is allowed to remain free. And the consequences of that are predictably awful.
My son deserves to be respected. He deserves justice to be sought.
A serial killer, Tommy Lynn Sells, has been executed. Tommy Lynn Sells was never convicted of Joel's murder. He was, however, executed. There are those who will say justice has been served.
If we could be together again.
And I freely admit that this has broken me. Nobody teaches you how to survive this. I miss him so bad, to this day. He was just truly, truly special.
This was a mother who went through the worst thing any parent could go through, losing a child, and then actually served prison time for that, and essentially prove your innocence. That's as much a definition of hell as I think anyone could come up with. Will it cause future prosecutions to perhaps be a little more diligent about at least considering what sound like unlikely alibis? It should.
Even though her strong faith is sustaining her, she is still and will continue to suffer for his murder.
Joel's always going to be a part of my life, and it's with me every day, wherever I am.
I'm hooked up to your life support, so don't let me go.
And we should note that since her exoneration, Julie Ray has become an advocate for women who feel they've been wrongfully convicted.
That's right, and she is working with organizations that help women who are fighting to prove their innocence. That's our program for tonight. I'm Amy Robach.
And I'm David Muir. From all of us here at 2020 and ABC News, thanks for watching. Good night.
I avoid this place. Since 1990, my sister, Tanya Bennett, was murdered here.
It was the most jumbled up case I've ever seen in my life. It's beginning to become very bizarre to me.
Laverne Pavlinac says she heard her boyfriend talking about killing a woman.
She was a character, I can tell you that.
A decade-long relationship that can only be described as dysfunctional, to put it mildly. The police start to zero in on John Sosnowski.
Who's trying to put this on me? I don't remember going no court day, no party, for God's sake.
She says, I know he did it because I was there.
She points out exactly where that body had been placed. She could have missed it by 10 feet. I thought, my God, this woman was actually here.
This was sort of like, Laverne, are you telling stories again?
I always believed that the truth would truth would come out of the mouth of a serial killer.
It's like shoplifting.
It is nothing like shoplifting. You're killing somebody.
Portland is located in Multnomah County. It's basically northwest Oregon. It's a rather large metropolitan area.
Interstate 5 goes right on through the city of Portland. A lot of trucking. If you get on the freeway, you will see a lot of trucks.
It's a trucking hub. It's also a shipping hub. It used to be that thousands of containers would come in on ships, land in Portland, be taken off and put onto trucks and trains headed elsewhere in America.
Portland is divided by I-5 and the river. Downtown businesses and the wealth were on the west side, and then you had more of an underclass on the east side.
Back in the early 90s, Portland was a bit on the gritty side, definitely working class, no question about it.
Portland was like any other large urban area. We had our fair share of violent crimes.
Murders would really get big news coverage because we didn't have that many murders.
So when big crimes happened, people paid attention in a big way.
Portland, especially back in those days, was known mostly as a beautiful place.
One of the most beautiful and impressive features of Oregon is the Columbia Gorge.
It's a place where God just decided to gouge out a big long ditch in the earth, and the Columbia River runs down this gouge, but we call it the Gorge.
The Gorge is a place where people come to enjoy the outdoors. There's hunting, fishing, boating, hiking, just lots of fun activities to do.
The area is on all the postcards for the state of Oregon everywhere, and it's also a very common location for the dumping of bodies, unfortunately.
I worked for the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office in Portland, Oregon. I retired as a sergeant. In January of 1990, I was working homicide. It was a Monday, of course. Everything was basically routine, for about an hour, and then maybe around 9:30, we got notified that a body had been found in the Columbia Gorge.
A community college student taking a drive along the old scenic highway discovers a body and immediately alerts the authorities.
They're facing eastbound on the old scenic highway. This here is the crime scene.
The body of an unidentified woman was found in the Columbia Gorge, but it was off of this twisting road through a very lush forested area.
But when we got there, I looked up the hill and I could see this ravine, and that there was a body there. It was a female. Her clothing was lifted up above her breasts, and her jeans were down around between her knees and her ankles. And as I got to the body, I could see that she had been severely beaten and that there was a rope around her neck. And she was obviously deceased.
She had been strangled, and it was evident that there had probably been some kind of sexual assault.
Authorities begin to process the scene for clues. They need to find out who this woman was, how she got there, and who'd done this horrible thing.
There was a head hair found on the body.
The fly of her jeans had been torn away, that was missing.
There was nothing there that would have indicated who this person was. There was no identification. The only items that we found were a small red, Swiss Army knife, and a set of headphones for a Sony Walkman, which were real popular back then.
When she had still not been identified, the police had a sketch made up and circulated that in the local media looking for suggestions about who she might be.
A great deal of time elapsed, probably 7 or 8 days.
Michelle White's younger sister hadn't been home for a week. No one knew where she was. And then one night, a neighbor told her to watch the news.
This is a Channel 2 news brief.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Steve Dunn. Here are some of the stories we're working on in the Channel 2 newsroom tonight. We had a young woman who was dumped in the forest and brutally murdered.
Right off the bat, they showed a sketch of the person,
I thought to myself, well, that don't look like her. But once they showed her clothes and her shirt, all I could think about, oh my God, my sister.
At that point, the family recognized her as Tanya Bennett.
She's a 23-year-old woman. She's described by her family as super friendly, but maybe a little bit naive.
Tanya Bennett was intellectually disabled. She was coping, though, and had apparently, some social life.
She's a little bit slow, but she's the only one that graduated from high school. She read a lot. Instead of watching TV, it was music. Madonna. That's what she listened to all day.
Tanya Bennett had a history of some troubling behavior due to her lack of impulse control.
We tried to retrace Tanya Bennett's steps from when she was last seen on the 21st of January.
The day that she left the house, I do remember. She said, I'm going to go see my friends. I said, it's Sunday. The bus only runs once an hour. Where are you going to go? She says, yeah, I'm going to go see my friend. I said, okay, well, take the movies back on the way.
She had left her home, according to her mother, and she had some videotapes she was going to return, and she had her Sony Walkman with her in her purse.
She was carrying her soul-to-soul cassette tape, listening to her favorite song, Back to Life. Not far from where Tanya Bennett lived was a neighborhood tavern called the B&I, and she was kind of a semi-regular there. A waitress at the bar remembered Tanya being in there.
She walked in just happy-go-lucky and was hugging people. She was there playing pool with two guys, and then later during her shift, why she noticed that Tanya had left and the two men had gone.
But she didn't know anything more about whether she left with them or who the men were.
It wasn't unusual for her to leave the house and not come home for a few days.
Never found out what she was doing, how she was doing it, because she kept everything a secret.
We need to check out who she's been with, who might have a motive to do something like this.
Police spent days trying to track down these two guys who were playing pool where she'd been hanging around.
Not only did we go to the B&I Tavern, we went to, I don't know how many bars. There was one down on Southeast Portland at 92nd and Foster that she liked to go to also.
They tried everything they could to figure out what had happened to Tanya and who had done this to her. They were all dead ends.
They opened an anonymous tip line on Crime Stoppers, and one of the phone calls that came in was from a woman.
We've mouthed off a couple times talking about some dead girl. I shouldn't be telling all this, but I can't protect him anymore.
I call it a diary of cases I worked on. Of course, this is just 1 year. And it's got a lot of the stuff about Tanya Bennett's homicide in here. There's 800 pages of reports. On this here, it says, follow up on homicide, see file number, blah, blah, blah. So I didn't go into detail. It was the most jumbled up case I've ever seen in my life. I wished I had never drawn it, to be honest with you. It was just my turn in the barrel, I guess.
Several weeks go by after Tanya's body is discovered, and the police really are trying to solve the case. They're working around the clock, but to no avail.
The two men she was last seen playing pool with at the bar were eliminated as suspects. So it was back to the drawing board for the detectives. They put out more information in the media asking for tips.
We also canvassed Tanya's neighborhood. That's basic. You go from door to door and ask people, hey, when was the last time you saw Tanya, blah, blah, blah. Uneventful. No fruit there.
Solver's off the hill.
The anonymous tip line starts blowing up, and it was one caller who provided the break in the case they were looking for.
He said that him and this guy did it, and they took her up near Vista. one of them strangled her to death.
A phone call came in that was a woman claiming anonymously that a guy named John Sosnowski had been heard at a bar almost boasting that he had strangled a girl.
By day, John worked at a lumber yard, but at night, he drank. John was an alcoholic.
He was only on probation for DUI. No criminal history other than that.
They learned that John Sosnowski had a girlfriend, an older woman named Laverne Pavlinac.
Laverne Pavlinac and John Sosnowski were involved in a codependent dysfunctional relationship, the details of which were never made real clear. But she was really wanting to be out of the relationship.
Laverne would repeatedly call the probation officer, kind of claiming that he was drinking too much, he was not pleasant to live with.
He's real paranoid. He does his drinking. After about 8 at night, he waits till he knows nobody's going to come around. And he's so unpredictable. And I know he's capable of being violent. I've went through many rages with him through the years.
Laverne eventually admits to the probation officer that she's the one who's been making anonymous calls to the police. This is typical behavior for her. They had a volatile relationship. Earlier, she'd tried to pin other things on Sosnowski.
There was a bank robbery where they published a picture, and she reported him as the likely suspect in the bank robbery. And the FBI investigated that case and found out that John couldn't be responsible for it.
She agrees to meet with police to talk with them about the possible involvement of John Sosnowski in the murder.
We were greeted at the door by Mrs. Pavlinac, and she invited us in. She was very cordial, offered us coffee, and she struck me as just a really nice older lady. I thought, wow, this is going to be interesting. You know, it was my first impression.
When police go to visit Laverne Pavlinac, they find a 57-year-old woman. She used to work at a state mental hospital.
She was alone until she kind of latched into this relationship with Sosnowski, who was 18 years her junior.
I found it an odd relationship. Now, why she was attracted to him, I have no idea. Laverne stated that she had been with Sosnowski at JB's Lounge, and she had overheard him tell a man that he had killed a girl and left her body in the gorge, and that he had sex with her.
She then describes, he's talked about tying me up, he plays with rope, implicating him further in what's going on with Tanya Bennett.
Laverne then says that on the night of Tanya's disappearance, John came home at about 1 or 2 in the morning, immediately took off all his clothes, she says, and jumped in the shower, which Laverne told police was a very unusual thing for him to do.
The police believed her. She was credible.
She was a grandmotherly type person, you know, very accommodating.
I forgot about a lot of these. Here's us right here. Here's when you were born. She was like a best friend. That's how I felt about her. You tell her anything.
She's caring. She's naive. Wants to help anybody that she can help.
She was a character. I can tell you that. She was funny. Here's a good picture of Mom and Dad.
We were so normal. And then when their marriage ended after 26 years, because my dad kind of looked elsewhere, that's when things fell apart for her. Horribly fell apart for her.
She had gone through a lot of difficult steps in her life. She had been divorced, remarried, the new husband had died of cancer.
Before he died, he had a farmhand, and his name was John Sosnowski.
They began a decade-long relationship that can only be described as dysfunctional, to put it mildly.
They were an unlikely romantic couple.
Well, I don't think she was in love with him. I think that she was at a bad place in her life.
She was lonely, and she didn't have anyone to take care of anymore because everybody was gone.
Police were able to get a search warrant to search the home that the two of them shared together.
We were looking for a purse. A section of Tanya Bennett's jeans had been cut away, a fly section. We were looking for that.
They're able to get into the house and they search. They find basically nothing, except for a piece of paper that has
T. Bennett dash good piece written on it.
T, like in the initial T for Tanya. Bennett, good piece. That I thought was amazing.
A good piece, the expression used to be a good piece of ass.
Was that a reference to a woman he had just murdered and raped?
They're not able to identify who that handwriting is, but it moves the investigation somewhat forward.
The police decide to question John Sosnowski. They bring him in.
Do you have any knowledge of the death of Tanya Bennett?
Then they discover something that will turn this entire case on its head.
It's beginning to become very bizarre to me.
I've driven this road at least 1,000 times when I was a kid. I avoid this place since 1990. When my sister, Tanya Bennett, was murdered here.
This is the area where Tanya Bennett's body was dumped.
The homicide investigation is finally picking up speed. Laverne Pavlinac says she heard her boyfriend talking about killing a woman.
After searching Laverne and John's apartment and finding that note with Tanya Bennett's name on it, the police start to zero in on John Sosnowski.
On the strength of statements from Laverne Pavlinac, detectives got John Sosnowski to come down to the station.
He agreed to accompany us to a substation located in Wilsonville. At that point, we interviewed John.
Today is Friday, February 16, 1990. Time now is 6:40 p.m. Mr. John Allen Sosnowski. John, you realize that this conversation is being recorded? Yes, it is, sir. You understand we're investigating the homicide of Tanya Ann Bennett? Yes, sir.
He was cooperative. He was willing to speak with them and talk with them.
We've shown you a Polaroid photograph of Tanya Ann Bennett. Do you recognize this person?
No, I do not, sir.
Do you recall ever having seen this person before in your life?
No, sir.
Did you have a conversation with an individual in a lounge, JB's, regarding the murder of Tanya Bennett?
No, sir.
Do you have any knowledge of the death of Tanya Bennett?
No, sir.
John Sosnowski was adamant that he had never met Tanya Bennett and that he definitely didn't kill Tanya Bennett.
That, of course, was flying in the face of what Pavlinac was saying. One of them is lying.
Anything else you'd like to say, sir?
Yes, if I may. I'm more than willing to help in any way that I can and clear myself and to help you people because I have nothing to hide.
We'll conclude the interview. Time now is 6:58 p.m.
They took a hair sample from John Sosnowski to try to match that up to evidence from the crime scene.
The interview ends, but John is sent home. The police decide they just don't have enough evidence to arrest or detain him.
The interesting part is that right after he gets released, Pavlinac contacts detectives again. She's very concerned about why things aren't going her way.
She was now engaged in this process. In fact, she was showering them with calls at all times and kind of escalating the situation.
Over the weekend, Laverne had contacted me and said that John had told her he may have written that note that was found in a dresser drawer that said T. Bennett, good piece.
Laverne contacts law enforcement again and says, "Oh, I have even more for you."
She had found a strange purse in her trunk of her car.
And it contains news clippings about Tanya Bennett's murder and also contained a cut-away piece of denim from a pair of girls' jeans. Remember, when Tanya's body was found, the fly had been cut out of the jeans. Now, police think this is a huge break because this appears to be that missing piece of denim.
I'm thinking, This is really amazing.
Killers will often take a little trophy. They'll take a little mementos. They'll keep something from the victim.
And there's more good news for police. There's physical evidence that seems to corroborate Laverne's claims to the police.
There was a head hair found on Tanya's body that was consistent with John Sosnowski.
I can't say it is for sure John's. I can't say it isn't John's. But it's a distinct possibility.
It wasn't like a fingerprint. It was just a corroborating piece of evidence.
Armed with new evidence, detectives go back to John Sosnowski. They ask him to take a lie detector test.
Took a polygraph, flunked it.
The examiner informs Corson that, in his opinion, John Sosnowski has direct knowledge of the death of Tanya Bennett.
After he is told that he was deceptive, Sosnowski begins to modify his version.
John writes out a 7-page statement and reads it out on tape.
I have seen T. Bennett at JB's truck stop on several occasions. The last time was 21 January 1990. I was visiting with Chuck Riley, who was playing darts.
He says that, yes, they were in the bar and that Tanya left with another guy.
They went to a nearby truck stop, supposedly to have sex with each other.
Later that evening, I saw Chuck Riley and asked him for a ride home. I believe I saw a body in the back of the car. The body was wrapped in a blanket. The body was one of a white female adult. I had not known how she was killed.
John Sosnowski has moved from never knowing or seeing Tanya Bennett all the way through to seeing her dead in the back of Chuck Riley's car.
We go and try to talk to Chuck Riley. He says, "You're crazy." No, that didn't happen at all.
Do you have any knowledge of the death of Tanya Ann Bennett?
None.
Do you have any responsibility? Were you involved in that personally?
No.
Do you know anything about this gal at all?
No.
Do you have any idea why Mr. Sosnowski would tell the police that you were involved in that?
No, I do not. Why he would do something like that. Chuck Riley voluntarily says, "Hey, look," he says, "you guys can search my car."
Fully cooperative with the examination of the car.
It's fully processed. There isn't one item of evidence in there to indicate that Tanya Bennett had ever been in that car. No blood, no hair, nothing.
There was no indication at the truck stop that any room had been rented either by that man or by Tanya Bennett. He passed his polygraph.
The Chuck Riley story in the analysis of the investigation becomes a deflection by Sosnowski, who we believe is responsible for the murder.
Police really need something much more concrete to be able to arrest him for Tanya's murder. So they get a warrant and they install a wiretap in John's apartment.
I just think about that girl's mother and just
We were outside in an unmarked van, and we had asked Laverne to try to get John to volunteer information regarding the homicide of Tanya Bennett.
Oh. I saw the body of the Lord. He carried it. No. Who's trying to put this on me? I don't never go to no good gay, no body, for God's sake. I don't.
And he raises his voice and says, "I don't know what you're talking about. Are you trying to frame me?"
Why? That's the worst thing you've ever got yourself into.
In the month since Tanya was murdered, so much is happening in the world of politics, sports.
Super Bowl MVP.
Joe Montana threw those 5 touchdowns to win the Super Bowl for the 49ers.
Good evening. This was Nelson Mandela's first full day of freedom.
Nelson Mandela walking free in South Africa after spending decades in prison.
I have lost a great deal. All about these good 7 years.
And Tanya's favorite song, Back to Life, it won the Grammy.
For the detectives, their investigation hits a major roadblock when they examine evidence found in Laverne Pavlinak's trunk.
One of the items that she provided for them was a piece of cloth from a pair of jeans.
She hands them a purse that is of similar description to what Tanya Bennett would have lost.
Tanya Bennett's mother said, no, that's not her purse. I've never seen that purse before.
We'd send a section of jeans down to the crime lab to have them compared to Tanya's jeans that she was wearing when she was found, and it doesn't match.
So that tells you that Laverne is fabricating evidence.
We confronted Laverne with that fact, and Laverne admitted that she had planted those items in the trunk of the car, trying to convince us that John Sosnowski had been involved in the homicide of Tanya Bennett.
She wanted him out of her life. She thought, this is the way to get this man away from me.
When they confront her, she then implicates herself. She says, I know he did it because I was there.
Laverne tells police a news story, that she got a call from John in the middle of the night and that he had a request.
Phone rang. It was John Sosnowski. Okay. Calling to tell me he was in trouble and to come fast.
What do you want you to bring?
Bring something large to wrap something in.
Okay, and what did you take with you when you went to see John at the J&B Lounge?
Blue shower curtain.
She stated also that she had met John Sosnowski at JB's Lounge and brought along a shower curtain. When she pulled into the parking lot, there was a body laying on the pavement.
As you drove closer, what did you find that something on the ground to be?
A female. She was lying on her side, very prone, very quiet.
Laverne Pavlinac says she immediately recognized the woman to be Tanya Bennett, a former patient at the mental hospital where Pavlinac herself once worked.
She asked John, said, is she okay? And he said, it's worse than that. She's dead.
I said, why is she dead? He says, because I choked her. I said, I think we need to take her to a hospital. We need to report this, John. No, I'll go to pen. I'll go to death row.
He made her wrap up the body and hide the body in the trunk of a car, and that they drove out to the gorge to dispose of the body.
He opened the back door on the passenger side and pulled her out, and he went off into the woods with her.
After dumping the body into the woods, do you recall any conversation he might have said to you?
Just that I better not open my mouth if this never happened, or I will cause trouble for your family. I'll hurt your family.
At that point, she's implicating herself. She's saying, okay, I helped him, but it was only after he had murdered Tanya Bennett.
Laverne has changed her story multiple times. Police start to be skeptical of whether or not she's telling the truth.
So at this point, the police need to really test the credibility of Laverne.
So they say to her, okay, take us to where you disposed of Tanya's body.
Detective Ingram and Corson take her out to see whether or not they could make sense of the physical locations versus what her statements were. They drove her up to the gorge.
There's a place called Vista House. That's kind of an identifiable spot.
A well-known place that local people can see up the gorge all the way to the horizon.
But that's not where the body was found. It was more in the surrounding areas.
Now, as Corson and I are proceeding on the Columbia Highway,
kind of this twisting, winding road where everything sort of looks the same.
They drove the distance from the Vista House to Lateral Falls.
We drive past where the body had been deposited. And she says, well, we've gone too far. Turn around. And we're driving back. She says, this here bugs me. Stop.
She got out and said, this is it. This is where the spot was. This is where we dropped the body.
She points out exactly where that body had been placed. She couldn't have missed it by 10 feet. And that absolutely astounded me. I thought, my God, this woman was actually here.
We have a photograph. She is standing in the forest, pointing, and the detective swore to me they had not in any way given her a clue.
They brought that information back, and we said, we need to go out and arrest him and put him in jail.
John Sosnowski has been charged with the murder of Tanya Bennett based on Laverne's account. But now Laverne tells police she has something new to share.
What she said was correction time.
I thought, okay, what do we got now?
This was sort of like, Laverne, are you telling stories again?
Multnomah County detectives believe they have finally solved the murder of Tanya Bennett. They arrest John Sosnowski.
We had enough probable cause to arrest John Sosnowski and took him into custody and transported him to a booking facility.
And a few days later, they get another call from Laverne Pavlinac, and she has more to talk about.
So myself and Detective Corson go out to her condominium. She says, it's correction time.
Correction time. That's what she said to them. Correction time.
I mean, those two detectives, their heads must have been spinning because this was a constantly evolving story.
I thought, okay, what do we got now?
And in this conversation, Laverne tells them that she needs to tell them what really happened with Sosnowski and Bennett.
Then we asked her if she'd be willing to make a statement on tape, and she said yes, she would like to do that.
So they then turn on the tape recorder.
Today is Monday, February 26, 1990.
And she now revisits her trip to JB's truck stop. She went there to pick up Sosnowski.
You pulled into the lot. What did you see, if anything?
I seen John standing with a young lady.
That young lady we're talking about is Tanya Bennett, is that right?
Correct.
Sosnowski was there with Tanya Bennett, and Tanya Bennett was alive. Sosnowski tells Laverne that they're going to give Bennett a ride home. Bennett and Sosnowski both get in the car.
They're leaving JB's lounge. John and Tanya are in the car. They're playfully fighting with one another.
She slapped him, he slapped her, punched her, slapped her. And they were laughing.
Did it progress into something where there wasn't laughter any longer?
Yes, then it became serious, a serious argument. Yeah, as we went further down the freeway, he said, I'm going to take her.
Did he tell you that he was going to have sex with her?
Yes.
You told us there was a point where John said, quote, she's not going home, end of quote. Is that his words to the best of your memory?
Yes, it is.
And they drive up to the Columbia Gorge. They get to Vista House, Crown Point, on the scenic highway. He tells Laverne to pull into the parking area.
He went to the trunk, and there was rope in there. He says, I'm going to tie her up. It's more of a thrill this way.
Laverne says she gets out of the car, and she goes to this stairwell, and Tanya Bennett's laying there in the stairwell. She's alive.
And John wanted her to get behind her head and to pull the rope, tighten her on her neck while he was having sex with her.
And what were you doing while he was having sex with her?
I was holding the rope outward.
He says, draw the rope tight. Laverne says she continues to draw the rope tight and looks away.
And he kept saying, hang on, hang on. I must have tightened it as I was hanging on.
She said Tanya Bennett was moving. Suddenly, Tanya Bennett ceases to move.
And it's the process of pulling that rope tight when her body went limp?
Yeah, did.
Okay. Ms. Pavlinac, let me ask you a question. Do you believe, sitting here today, that by pulling that rope tight, that you caused the death of Tanya Ann Bennett?
Yeah.
You do?
I feel like it's my fault.
Laverne said at that point, they put Tanya Bennett back in the car. They transport her to where her body was located, and then they drive home.
And moments after telling it to the police, she turned in front of the two detectives and confessed to the daughter.
Have her tell me this story. And I looked at her again and I said, Mom, are you sure? And she goes, well, they told me I had to tell you this. Because if I told you, then they would believe me.
Now, I'm thinking, she's pointed out the dump site. She's confessed to us on tape. She's told her own daughter the same story, very convincingly. I'm thinking, my God, she is actually involved in this.
In this final version of what happened to Tanya Bennett, she has implicated herself in the murder, and she gets arrested.
I'm told to place her into a holding cell. I said, okay, Laverne, now you need to go into that room right there. She turned around and she looked at me and she gave me a hug. I thought, oh my God, I felt like I put my mother in jail.
They slammed that middle door on you. That's when I started to realize what I had done. Like it woke me up.
So once behind bars, alone with her thoughts, Laverne Pavlinac has a stunning about-face. She says her dying grandson pleads with her to finally come clean.
I finally told my attorney, what would you say if I told you that I made all this up? I lied. He said he wouldn't believe me. And this is what I did. I lied.
And she told me that she wasn't going to plead guilty. I warned her that she was likely to be convicted, but she still wanted to go to trial.
Her trial defense was that she had made this up.
She recants her confession and says, I made it all up just to get rid of this guy.
She says, I just wanted to get out of this abusive relationship. So you're gonna frame him for murder and incriminate yourself? Who does that?
She did say that she was sorry about it all. It was kind of weak compared to what she had been saying.
In the closing arguments, I argued for 8 or 9 hours all of the defects in the confession, all the things that were incorrect. I was convinced that she was innocent.
But the prosecution only had to hit the play button on the recorder and say, listen to her words.
And did you pull it tight, the rope tight?
Yes, I did.
And that's what causes you to believe that maybe she died during that incident at that time.
The tape did the argument for him.
We heard a lot of tapes of her making these accusations of what took place and all. She really just convicted herself. We all found her guilty, all 12 jurors.
The jury finds her guilty of felony murder and sentences her to life.
Now, John, he's up next for trial, but he sees this is bad. She got convicted. He believes he's going to go down. He takes a plea.
John pled no contest to the charge of first-degree murder to avoid the possibility of a death sentence and wound up getting life imprisonment.
Laverne Pavlinac was so convincing that I think people will tell you that John Sosnowski himself came to believe, I guess that must be what happened. Because he blacks out so often, he wasn't really able to account for where he would have been or to provide a more aggressive defense, something like an alibi.
You know, the night before Laverne's trial was to start, I told Jim, I said, I don't feel right about this. I couldn't put my finger on exactly what it was.
Just before the trial started, there were writings that were made on a bathroom stall door on a truck stop or a rest area.
These cryptic messages were found hundreds of miles away from the courthouse, one in Montana and one in eastern Oregon.
I killed Tanya Bennett.
The people took the blame.
So I can kill again.
We don't know who wrote it. Don't know when it was written, why it was written.
It was classic hearsay, not admissible in evidence.
So we never heard about it in the jury.
There's somebody who's claiming credit for the murder of Tanya Bennett.
Who's doing this and why? Is the real killer still out there, or is it some sort of creepy prank?
It's the strangest case I'll have ever worked on. Too many people confessing to the same crime.
I always believed that the truth would come out eventually. I just didn't think the truth would come out of the mouth of a serial killer.
Seems like my luck has run out. I've been a killer for 5 years and have killed 8 people.
We thought that our case is closed, and now it looks like it's anything but closed.
This handwritten letter with a happy face scrawled on the top, a smile and 2 eyes.
And I thought, he's teasing the police, like, ha ha ha, here I am, see if you can find me.
And then he started confessing to other murders.
This is the recovery of a body that was located over the bank.
It's Tanya Bennett all over again.
Gosh, maybe this guy did do it, and maybe these people are innocent.
Now remember, Laverne had implicated her boyfriend John in the murder of Tanya Bennett. She even claimed that she was involved. But now there's a whole new suspect.
They now had not just an anonymous letter writer drawing a happy face. They had a real person.
He tell anybody who'd listen, I'm the happy-faced killer.
She sent us from prison.
Just love, Mother. Got a lot of these. Here's us right here.
For more than 25 years, Bonnie and Darlene have literally saved everything related to their mother's case.
Airtight, except for a lot of leaks. Here we are visiting Mom at the women's prison. And her prison photo.
Pokey picture.
Pokey picture. She was very giving. She'd give you the shirt off her back. I mean, she was that kind of woman. That's why all of this doesn't make sense.
Their mother, Laverne, told police a series of stories that implicated not only herself, but her boyfriend, John Sosnowski, in the murder of Tanya Bennett. She confessed to not only putting a rope around Tanya's neck, she pointed out the exact spot where they found Tanya's body.
I think what happened to Mother was, she was in an abusive relationship and she was desperate. And desperate people do desperate things.
People are like, who would do that?
She must have really been desperate, though. She must have been.
These two sisters knew that their mother was not guilty in their hearts, but nobody would listen to them. And then in the spring of 1994, they discovered that there was at least one other person who believed Laverne was not guilty.
Got a call on my cell phone, and it was Phil Stanford from the Oregonian. And he said, Darlene, I think we know who's done all this. I think we can get your mom out.
Every morning at the Oregonian, there would be a stack of mail. It was mostly letters and news tips, complaints. I remember that day we got a really sick one. This handwritten letter, several pages, with a, happy face scrawled on the top. And, a smile and two eyes.
And these were anonymous letters.
About halfway through the first page, the writer confessed to a murder. He named the victim Tanya Bennett.
But we already have two people locked up in prison, Laverne Pavlinek and then John Sosnowski.
So it looked like a hoax. But the letter just went on for several pages, all handwritten. And then he started confessing to other murders. And another.
I went to truck driving school and learned to drive. While driving, I learned a lot and heard of people that have gotten away with such a crime because of our nomad life.
Here's a guy who's on the move constantly. He's a long-haul trucker. So he pulls into one place at one night. He's there for a few hours. Maybe he sleeps in his cab, and he's gone. Who even knew he was there?
I had to decide whether I was going to recycle it or do something with it. I decided I would give it to a reporter, a guy named Phil Stanford.
Phil Stanford, who was sort of a muckraker in many respects, but he could be pretty thorough.
The letter said 5 of 5, sort of cryptic. Turned out to be 5 murders he was talking about. And the first one was the local murder, Tanya Bennett. 2 people were already in prison for that. I figured, okay, I'll check out the other 4.
This person says that he killed 5 women in the past 4 years in 2 different states, in Oregon and California.
I called the authorities in these other locations where the writer claims to have killed women and dumped their bodies, and there were bodies in every one of those cases.
We first got a copy of a letter from a reporter in Portland and signed with a smiley face. And he claimed responsibility for a Jane Doe homicide that we had. And we had no other leads at that point.
I killed her. I dumped her body about 7 miles north of Blythe on 95.
He described the location, which was correct. We did find duct tape at the scene.
He knew things that no one would have known unless they were the killer or an investigator.
Stanford's a journalist, so he decides to go back and take another look at Tanya Bennett's police file.
Pretty soon it became clear to me that these people didn't do it. Even though they confessed, they didn't do it.
I went over everything that he wanted to report and double-checked it, triple-checked, and it all checked out. We decided that he would report it in a series.
Now, at that point, they didn't know who had written the anonymous letters. Bill Stanford is the one who came up with the nickname Happy Face Killer.
The letter was of keen interest to the newspaper, but authorities looked at it with skepticism. They weren't going to put much stock in it unless they knew who wrote it.
Oh, I thought he's teasing the police. Like, ha ha ha, here I am, see if you can find me. Look over your shoulder, I might be right behind you. Obviously, the guy was mentally ill, to say the least.
I read all the information Stanford was putting out in his columns. There really wasn't anything in those letters about Tanya Bennett that hadn't been widely discussed at the trial. It was very good reading, but it was really nothing we could deal with criminally on our case.
Nothing ever really came of the Happy Face letter. Think about it. Detectives in Multnomah County weren't about to reopen a murder case just because of an anonymous letter, especially because they already had 2 people in prison serving time for the murder of Tanya Bennett. Then in March of 1995, another dead body in the Columbia Gorge, but this time on the other side of the river in Skamania County, Washington.
We're about a quarter mile, maybe a little less, into Skamania County from the Clark County side on State Route 14, which is also known as the Evergreen Highway. This is where the motorist pulled over to urinate. He had walked across the guardrail and walked over closer to the bank where it's a little more wooded area where you could be a little bit more concealed from the traffic.
911, how can I help you? I think I found a body alongside the road. It looks like a female. I can see a hand, fingernail polish.
So looking just down over the bank, about 20 feet down, there's a little vine maple broadleaf tree that comes up right there. Her body was found just next to that and a little bit uphill from that.
This is the recovery of a body that was located over the bank.
As we approached the scene where she was located, the first thing that I was struck by was that she was completely nude. There was no purse, there was no jacket, there was no anything nearby that could possibly give us an identity to who this person was. There appeared to be some adhesive on her cheeks and over her mouth that appeared consistent with maybe the adhesive from duct tape. I noticed that there's a dark discoloration on her shoulders and neck area. It could have been consistent with strangulation.
It's Tanya Bennett all over again. Another woman found dead with no ID. A naked body found in the Columbia River Gorge. Death by strangulation. And another phone call to police, confessing.
I checked my voicemail, and I received a telephone message from him, reporting on my answering machine. I was very surprised by it.
And you were right.
Judge when I die. I am telling you this because I will be responsible for these crimes and no one else. But I will not turn myself in. I am not stupid.
It's been a year since the Happy Face articles appeared in the Oregonian. Laverne's daughters are trying in vain to clear their mother's name in the murder of Tanya Bennett, but the news cycle has already moved on.
In March of 1995, I received a telephone call from my supervisor saying that they had recovered a body of a female that was over the embankment on Highway 14. And there was no identification on her. We had no idea who she was.
The medical examiner ruled that the cause of death was due to manual strangulation. During the autopsy, the fingerprints were lifted of the victim. We were able to identify her as Julie Winningham.
And then this is Julie with my son Joshua. And then this is Julie
with Jeff. This was in 78. This was taken. She was my best friend. I called her Jules. She was 5'2", blonde hair, blue eyes, weighed about 98 pounds, and adorable. Always wore her hair very short, did not like long hair. Always loved hoop earrings. She was just cute. Yeah. Wasn't she beautiful? She truly was. She was beautiful inside as well as outside. And that's how I remember her. She was a free spirit, and she would go here or there, and she would go to work at a place and wouldn't work for very long because she would always go out on the road. But, you know, she would pop in and pop out, and over the years, she was that type of person.
But Melissa says the last time she saw Julie, they had this really big blowout fight about Julie's partying and her drinking. And then she never saw her again.
I told her to get out, and then she went back out on the road. I knew we would make up, because you can't be friends for 20 years and not make up. So I felt very guilty for a number of years, because I feel that if I hadn't had that fight with her, she would never have left town, and she might be alive today.
We showed her photograph to other residents of the area that we were able to identify who she might have been hanging out with.
As the investigators were going out, those interviews were being audio recorded on there. It was a little micro cassette player.
This is Detective Joe Levo, Clark County Sheriff's Office. The date is March 16, 1995.
Investigators talked with several people who hung out with Julie just 2 days before her body was discovered.
Where do you know Julie from?
I know her from down on East Street. When she came up with stuff.
Was Julie here with someone else?
Yes, she was.
Okay, can you tell me a little bit, how'd they get here?
In a blue semi-truck.
Interviewing other friends of Julie Winningham. And we're getting a picture that she had been seen with a very large man, a long-haul truck driver, drove a big blue semi-truck.
What do you look like?
He was tall, built, brown hair. He was about 6'6", good 300 pounds.
Police learned that Julie was in a relationship with a very tall, large trucker, that they were talking about moving in together, and Julie had even told some people that they were engaged to be married.
So it's something that it was a close relationship with whoever this man was. Unfortunately, the friends couldn't remember what his name was.
You know the guy's name?
No.
Who was that person?
I don't know. I think his name was Chris.
I recall either Rich or Chris. Those are the two names I couldn't say for sure.
Julie introduced me to this guy, and I can't like me remember if his name was Chris or Pete.
Well, from an investigative standpoint, we obviously wanted to talk to him. We wanted to find out if he knew what happened to Julie Winningham, because as far as we knew, he was probably the last person to be with her.
There were several names. Nobody actually recalled what his name was until we met with Bonnie Valenstein.
How do you know Julie?
He made it at the restaurant that I used to work at. She was coming to coffee with him.
And Bonnie tells us that she had bought a car from Julie Winningham recently.
Her new fiance, which she introduced. I don't remember personally what his name was, but everybody said it was Jerry. So.
Somebody mentioned you was Jerry?
Yeah, new fiance, which she introduced.
Okay. Then what happened?
He wrote out the bill of sale. She signed it.
So obviously we asked to see this bill of sale. She did show it to us, and you know, at the very bottom, not only is there a signature of this very large long-haul truck driver, but there's a printed name above it, Keith Hunter Jesperson. And that was our first knowledge of who this long-haul truck driver was that she had been seeing. We're starting to hear these things about this long-haul truck driver, Keith Jesperson, that was really starting to concern us. These were people that possibly were getting married. It was a pretty significant relationship was being described to us. Yet where's Keith Jesperson? This person's just gone. Where's this person at, and why aren't they here asking questions?
It was hard to pin down any information, but all of their research around trucking and truck stops and truck companies led them to an important clue. He drove a blue rig, just like the kind that the TWT truckers drove. And that was a really key detail.
So we just traveled to Spokane and asked to speak with the management. Just ask a little bit of questions about Keith Jesperson. They admitted that he was a driver for them.
So then the trucking company told Buechner that Jesperson was actually due to make a delivery in Las Cruces, New Mexico in just 2 days.
And we flew down ahead of him. We were able to set up there and wait for him to show up.
We identified ourselves as detectives and asked if he'd come to the sheriff's office to talk to us. He said he'd absolutely go there, no problem. And that was our first insight into Keith Jesperson, because Keith Jesperson thoroughly enjoyed talking about how great Keith is.
Can you state your full name, please?
My name is Keith Hunter Jesperson.
And your date of birth?
April 6th, 1955. I got introduced to truck with my father in Jesperson Contracting in 1972 when I was still in school.
How did you get the nickname the Happy Face Killer? I had the opportunity to speak with Keith Jesperson back in 2010, and I found him to be polite, and yet he spent a lot of time talking about himself. What was your childhood like?
Well, I considered it a good childhood. You know, my father and mother were good people. We had tough love in our family. And my father used his belt, and my mother used a wooden spoon, and, you know, that's the way he punished us.
These photos and videos, licensed from his daughter, Melissa Moore, provide a glimpse into Keith Jesperson's life.
He didn't have close relationships with other kids in the neighborhood, was picked on because he was bigger than the rest of the kids.
Yeah, I brought a yearbook. This is Keith's senior picture, and his song he picked, which I thought was kind of ironic, is Born to Be Wild. He was really awkward. I don't know if it was his size or what, but he just seemed really out of place and awkward. Some of us called him, unfortunately, Baby Huey, and that wasn't very nice.
Baby Huey, which is a cartoon character of, I think it's like a big chicken or something.
Huey going swimming, Huey going swimming.
I got married August 2nd, 1975 in Moxie, Washington.
Okay. And you got 2 kids? Is that 3?
He's a long-haul truck driver. Had been doing it for a long time.
He would be gone during the week, and then on Friday, he'd be rolling down the dirt road with his semi-truck and pull in. And we would have a glorious, fun weekend together. And then he'd be off on the road again.
I got divorced in around the year 1988. She packed up and moved to Spokane with the kids.
You see him at age 26 being fired from a very important job that he had.
Dr. Robert Shug is a forensic psychologist, and he evaluated Jesperson by speaking with him multiple times.
Keith mentions this period of his marriage when things really went south. So all of this really starts creating a very turbulent emotional period for the entire family, to be sure, but particularly for Keith.
Once my parents divorced, my father's behavior became more erratic, and creepy. It was like he was free and unfiltered to say whatever disturbing thing he wanted to say or do.
Once Jesperson is tracked down in New Mexico, the police go and get him, and they question him. But he denies having anything to do with Whittingham's death.
The interesting part about it is after we told him that Julie Whittingham was killed, he never asked how she died, what happened to her. We spent probably 6 or 7 hours interviewing him in regards to his last contacts with Julie Whittingham. He emphatically denied killing her.
Rick Buckner and I, we all were very concerned that we, at that stage, we felt that he had killed Julie Whittingham and that we just weren't able to make the arrest yet.
His story was that he had consensual sex with her, so we had no physical evidence. So how do we prove different?
We were going to let this guy drive away, and we're a couple miles away from the Mexican border. And so we were pretty convinced that he was going to hightail it into Mexico, and that would be the end of that.
What the detectives don't know is that Jesperson is desperate to cover his own tracks.
I called my brother Brad and I said, "You really need to get rid of this. Go flush it down the toilet."
The plane ride back was pretty quiet from all of us, just racing through our mind what the next step's going to be. Once we got off the plane in Portland, I turned on my phone, and I did have a voicemail.
After playing phone tag for a tense 2 days, Detective Buckner finally gets the nomadic truck driver on the telephone for a critically important phone call.
Okay, Keith, tell me what happened. Where are you at right now? Right now I'm at the 4D truck stop, exit 378, in I-10 in Arizona.
I told him, I said, I think you killed Julie Whittingham. You know, all the evidence points in your direction. But he was never hostile. He was never aggressive.
Okay. Keith, why don't you go ahead and tell me what happened? She came in about 12 o'clock. She came and ate some pizza.
Told Rick that she had came to his truck, they had sex, and that he wanted to have sex again, and she didn't. And so he strangled her.
Body somewhere, so I parked to the white spot, took her over to the side, tossed off to the side. Okay, at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call the local sheriff's department and have them come down and contact you, all right? All right.
When the officers got there, he followed all of their orders. He was secured and transported back to the sheriff's office.
Flew down to Arizona with another investigator, and we took him into custody.
She was my friend. She was my sister. And I would stand and defend her to this day. Because if I would have met Jesperson, I would have pulled her away from him immediately because I wouldn't have liked him.
That confession was the key to the whole investigation. Without his confession, we didn't have a case. We couldn't prove that he killed her.
Police almost didn't get the confession. Jesperson admitted that before he gave himself up, he had tried to end his life.
I remember him saying, "There's not enough pills in this damn world that would kill me."
He felt his back was up against the wall. You know, doesn't want to go to prison at all, obviously. But when I spoke to him on the phone, he had described the letter that he had written to his brother.
And I started realizing that by sending the note to my brother Brad that I had shot myself in the foot.
Seems like my luck has run out. I have been a killer for 5 years and have killed 8 people. I guess I haven't learned anything.
I didn't know anything about the letter. We get back to my office and he wanted to make a phone call. He said, can I call my brother? I said, sure. I said, obviously you're in custody. I can't let you out of my sight, but if you want to use my phone in my office, go right ahead.
You have to remember, Jesperson was in jail for only one murder, and he did not want police to find out about the other 7 murders he confessed to his brother in that letter. So he told him to flush the letter down the toilet.
But his brother pretended like he threw it out, pretended as if he flushed it down the toilet, but he handed it over to the police.
The letter described basically that he had been killing for the past 5 years. He actually said he had killed 8 people. At that point in time, we only knew that he had killed Julie Winningham. We thought that our case is closed, and now it looks like it's anything but closed.
Reporters covering Jesperson's arrest remember the happy face letters, and they start putting 2 and 2 together when they start seeing the similarities between the Bennett case and the Winningham case. When we compared the 2 letters, you can easily see the similarities in the handwriting.
And that matched. The DNA, the fingerprints, the saliva on that letter also matched the happy face, anonymous happy face letters. So clearly they now had not just an anonymous letter writer drawing a happy face, they had a real person, Keith Jesperson.
Defense attorney Tom Phelan was appointed to the case, and at that point, there was only one murder, the Winningham murder. But it didn't take long for Tom Phelan to learn that there was a lot more to his client, Keith Jesperson.
The prosecutor called me. She said, listen, we got this letter. We're looking into it. I look at it and I go, okay. So I took that and went and had a conversation with Mr. Jesperson about it.
My lawyer comes in with a copy of the letter, asks me if there's any truth to it, and I realized then that, that the detective, Rick Buckner, had kind of put 2 and 2 together with the 1994 letter that dubbed me the happy face killer.
He told me that, yeah, this is all true. I had killed, he said I killed 8 women. You ask yourself, what do I do with this? How do I handle this? This person just told me he's committed multiple murders.
Meanwhile, Jesperson is still behind bars, seemingly enjoying his notoriety. He'd tell anybody who'd listen, I'm the happy-faced killer.
He was talking to the media, and that upset me, it upset the prosecutor, and it upset the judge. This is where it got to sort of a circus level. I mean, I had to wake up each day and see what my case was doing. He just loves the attention.
When I interviewed Jesperson, he told me step by step what led him to murder.
You're breaking the law, but you're getting away with it. And so there's a thrill of getting away with it.
After Keith Jesperson was arrested, he was almost like running a media campaign from the prison, wanting everybody to know that he was the happy-faced killer.
He reached out to our television station and said, I want to talk.
There are 8 total victims in the following states of Washington, Oregon, California, Florida, and Wyoming. You're saying that you're the happy face killer? I am the happy face killer.
It was just stunning to listen to.
To accept this call, dial 5 now.
Hello?
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Keith, one of your lawyers says you were a difficult client because you liked the spotlight so much.
I needed the press to help get the evidence up front to show that they had the wrong people in prison.
You say it's because you wanted to help the innocent victims behind bars, but there are other people who suggest that maybe you just wanted to take credit for those murders.
Well, I understand the point of that.
His demeanor's very soft-spoken. He engages in humor. You can have a good conversation with him, aside from the fact that he's responsible for 8 murders.
A lot of people describe you as a funny, charming guy, and yet you committed cold-blooded murders. How do you reconcile those 2 personalities?
It's just a moment in time when situations present themselves and you become what you are.
These were women who were simply at risk. He looked for victims of opportunity.
He chose women, it seems, who were not likely to be found, And if they were found, difficult to identify.
And these women, they were daughters, they were mothers, they were sisters. They did not deserve what he did to them.
She was found on August 30th, 1992. The body at that point was badly decomposed. And to this date, she's not been identified.
Jesperson says a month later he killed another woman. Her body was found behind a local cafe in Turlock, California.
What about Lori Ann Pentland?
Yes, I did kill her, yes.
What happened?
Well, she was a prostitute. I used her services.
Jesperson said she tried to make him pay her more money, and he didn't like that, and he choked her.
Victims number 5 and 6 were both Jane Does, but located on opposite ends of the country, one in California, one in Florida.
What about Angela Cerbrise? Is she the victim that you tied under the truck?
Yes, she is, yes.
He killed her, and then he tied her body underneath his truck and dragged her for a number of miles.
Why did you do that?
I felt that by dragging her under the truck, that I would destroy all evidence of who her identity was.
They had not even found the body yet. So his confession to that homicide actually led the police to the body, and the details lined up with what he had described. It was shocking to hear him describe these victims so callously, with no regard for their lives, for their humanity. Did it occur to you that you were taking somebody's life?
It became a nonchalant type thing because I got away with it. It's like shoplifting.
It is nothing like shoplifting. You're killing somebody.
It is everything like shoplifting. You're breaking the law, but you're getting away with it. And so there's the thrill of getting away with it.
It is so gruesome, Keith, what you're describing. I mean, there's a possibility that these people's family members might be listening to you describing this.
Sorry it happened. Wish it never happened. It's done. It's over with.
It was just heartbreaking. The women he murdered were human beings, and they all deserve to live.
Remember victim number 1, Tanya Bennett? Jesperson finally revealed, after all these years, her final moments.
I interviewed him 5 or 6 times, and we got along.
Detective Chris Peterson from the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office and Keith Hunter Jesperson. You want to talk to us about a homicide that occurred in 1990?
Keith told me that he had gone to the B&I Tavern to play pool.
This gal walked over and gave me a hug like I was somebody she knew. Describe this female to me.
Oh, I guess she'd be 5'6",
Dark hair, blue jeans, plaid shirt, tennis shoes, and a purse.
A lot of those details did line up, but he got some items of the clothing wrong.
They decided to go back to his house.
She made some comment to him that made him angry, so he started to hit her.
He ended up brutally beating her before strangling her.
And ultimately tied a rope around her neck.
He was worried about his fingerprints. So he cut off the button on her jeans, got rid of it.
Loaded her in the car and drove her out to the Columbia Gorge. We found no forensic evidence that linked Jesperson to this crime. None.
The detectives brought Keith Jesperson to the Columbia River Gorge.
It was heavy brushes like you see to my right. He said, this is where I threw the contents of her purse. Once we found the ID, we felt like we had solved the case.
Jesperson's not able to point out the right spot for the location of the body.
He couldn't remember where the body was, but Laverne Pavlinak did.
She knew details that only the killer would know.
But if Laverne is not the killer, how did she know the exact area where Tanya Bennett was found?
Tell me how you picked the spot where this victim's body was dumped.
In the fall of 1995, Keith Jesperson finally pleads guilty to killing Julie Winningham and Tanya Bennett.
While we were in the courtroom, he turned around and winked at me. So, he had no remorse. None. You could see it in his eyes. His eyes were cold as ice. We just had to sit there and listen to what he did. It's not an easy thing to listen to.
I washed the blood off the walls when I could, and eventually painted the walls of the house I was in, and tried to forget about it.
I think there may very well have been more victims had he not killed his girlfriend.
So I had 40 good years, and I had 8 days of insanity, and I'm being held responsible for the rest of my life on these 8 days of insanity.
The greatest human tragedy is that Laverne Pavlinac derailed the investigation in 1990, and in 4 years, Keith Jesperson killed more women.
The number one question on everyone's mind is how in the world did Laverne Pavlinac manage to dupe the authorities?
It was easy.
So did you just remember what they said?
I just did it from the papers and the search warrant.
Oh, so you got to read the search warrant?
I read it when they were busy doing something else.
But what about that photo, which really was the coup de grace? That sealed John Sosnowski's fate. How did she know the exact area where Tanya Bennett was found?
Just tell me how you picked the spot where this victim's body was dumped.
Seen all these tracks and all this and that. I knew it had to be around there someplace. But you could tell where people had been in and out with vehicles and everything else, limbs broke. Just said, it was close enough.
Why in the world would she put herself in the middle of that and get herself in a position to be convicted for something she didn't do?
The way Laverne Pavlinac incriminated herself, it's like it was a real head scratcher.
I used the term disturbed. I was a very disturbed person back then. I didn't think of it as lying even. It was just a way to get him out of my home.
On November 28, 1995, Laverne Pavlinac and John Sosnowski were freed from prison.
We were all outside the door, and she hugged everybody, kissed everybody.
Just real happy.
But I really felt sorry for John. He sat there for 4 years in prison for nothing that he was accused of doing.
As for Keith Jesperson, I had to ask him the ultimate question. Does he have any remorse? What, if anything, are your biggest regrets?
Sorry to the world. I'm sorry I am who I am. If I could go back and change everything, the world would be a better place. However, we all know that ain't going to happen.
Actually feeling sorry for the people that he caused pain to, he said he doesn't, and it's just something that I guess he's really not wired to feel.
Sadly, we forget the names of the victims, and I would rather remind people of the people who died than the people who did it.
Everybody has the right to be who they want to be. Julie was young, beautiful, silly. I didn't know that anything was going to happen to her. She didn't know either. But she comes in my dreams. I'm good. She makes me happy.
Keith Jesperson has been convicted of 6 murders in 4 different states, and he's currently serving consecutive life sentences for his crimes.
And authorities in Florida are still working to identify one of his victims. That is our program for tonight. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Amy Robach.
And I'm David Muir. From all of us here at 2020 and ABC News, good night.